You won't believe this. Hollywood promised glamour, fame, and eternal beauty. But behind the cameras, many of its brightest stars were chained to addictions that destroyed everything: their careers, their families, even their lives. Some addictions were whispered about in gossip columns. Others were so dark that studios spent fortunes hiding them from the public. Pills, alcohol, gambling, and more silent killers wrapped in silver packaging and champagne glasses. Tonight, we reveal the 10 addictions that ruined Hollywood legends, and the names you'll hear may shock you. #10 Judy Garland, the pills that stole her childhood. From the outside, Judy Garland was the girl who sang "Over the Rainbow." But behind that smile was a child trapped in the cruel grip of Hollywood. At just 13 years old, MGM studio executives began feeding her pep pills to keep her awake and sleeping pills to force her to rest. Her entire career became controlled by tablets. By the time she was in her 20s, she couldn't function without them. The same studio that made her famous had built her addiction, and it followed her all her life, leading to a tragic end at just 47. Her rainbow was beautiful, but it was poisoned. #9 Errol Flynn, drowning in alcohol. He was Hollywood's swashbuckling hero. Charming, adventurous, the man every woman wanted and every man envied. But Errol Flynn's real life was very different. Behind closed doors, he drowned himself in rivers of alcohol. Flynn drank heavily on set, often showing up unable to remember his lines. His once chiseled face aged quickly, his reputation shattered, and by the time he was in his 50s, his body was ruined. At just 50 years old, he was dead, not from a sword fight, but from the bottle he could never put down. #8 Tallulah Bankhead, addicted to attention and substances. Tallulah Bankhead was bold, brash, and unforgettable. She lit up the screen and dominated the stage. But she was also consumed by addictions not just to alcohol and drugs, but to chaos itself. She once admitted, "I'm as pure as the driven slush." Known for chain-smoking hundreds of cigarettes a day and indulging in wild parties that lasted until dawn, her health deteriorated rapidly. Her addiction wasn't to one substance, it was to excess itself, and it cost her both her career and her life. #7 Montgomery Clift, painkillers after the crash. Montgomery Clift was once described as the most beautiful man in Hollywood. But in 1956, everything changed. A near-fatal car accident shattered his jaw, nose, and face. After hours of surgery, he was left disfigured and in unbearable pain. Doctors prescribed him painkillers. Clift leaned on them heavily. Soon he was mixing them with alcohol. His once promising career spiraled as his addiction grew, and his life became what one friend called the slowest suicide in Hollywood history. He was just 45 when it ended. #6 Billie Holiday, the singer chained by heroin. Billie Holiday's voice was haunting, soulful, unforgettable, but her life was chained to heroin. She had begun using drugs in her youth, and by the time she reached stardom, heroin was her escape from the racism, heartbreak, and exploitation she endured daily. The U.S. government targeted her mercilessly, arresting her repeatedly for possession. Even on her deathbed, federal agents were stationed outside her hospital room. Addiction robbed her of her health, her freedom, and eventually her life, leaving behind only a voice that still echoes through time. #5 Spencer Tracy, the bottle behind the genius. Spencer Tracy was one of Hollywood's most respected actors, a two-time Oscar winner, admired for his raw, natural performances. But what the public didn't know was that he battled a crippling addiction to alcohol. Tracy drank quietly, often alone, and it haunted every part of his life. It ruined his marriage, strained his friendships, and sent him into periods of violent depression. Katharine Hepburn, his lifelong companion, tried to protect him, but even she couldn't stop the bottle. His greatness on screen was undeniable, but off-screen, it was alcohol that slowly claimed him. #4 John Barrymore, the legend who drank himself away, known as the Great Profile. John Barrymore was one of the greatest stage and screen actors of his time, but Barrymore had one true love: alcohol. He drank so heavily that directors had to feed him lines during filming. Sometimes he collapsed on stage, too drunk to continue. His addiction destroyed his career, leaving him bankrupt and disgraced. By the end, he was reduced to caricatures of his former glory, a reminder of how one of Hollywood's finest talents wasted away in a haze of drink. #3 Betty Ford, pills in the shadows of glamour. Before she became First Lady of the United States, Betty Ford was a dancer in Hollywood. There, she developed a dependence on prescription pills and alcohol, an addiction that followed her even into the White House. But unlike many others, Betty Ford turned her tragedy into change. After admitting her struggles publicly, she founded the famous Betty Ford Center, a rehabilitation clinic that has saved countless lives, including those of Hollywood's biggest stars. Her story proves that addiction doesn't always end in destruction, it can also spark redemption. #2. Elizabeth Taylor. The Queen of Excess. Elizabeth Taylor was Hollywood royalty. She had diamonds, Oscars, and a life most could only dream of, but behind the glamour, Taylor fought a relentless war with addiction. She was addicted to painkillers, alcohol, and even shopping, once admitting she spent over $100,000 a month just on clothes and jewelry. Her marriages crumbled, her health collapsed, and her name became synonymous with scandal. Yet she fought back, eventually seeking treatment and becoming one of the first major stars to speak openly about addiction. But the toll it took on her life and body was irreversible. #1. Marilyn Monroe. A tragic cocktail of pills and fame. She was the most famous woman in the world, but fame was Marilyn Monroe's most dangerous addiction. To sleep, she needed barbiturates. To wake up, she needed stimulants. To perform, she needed champagne to calm her nerves. Her medicine cabinet became her prison. Directors complained she arrived late to sets, slurring her lines. Friends worried about her reliance on pills, but the pressure of being Marilyn Monroe was unbearable. On August 5, 1962, she was found dead at just 36 years old, the victim of an overdose. Her death remains one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries, but one truth is undeniable: addiction destroyed her long before the pills did. So there you have it, 10 addictions that ruined Hollywood legends. Behind the flashing lights and perfect smiles were fragile lives chained to substances they couldn't escape. These stars were admired, worshipped, even immortalized on screen. But when the cameras stopped rolling, addiction stripped away everything. And here's the haunting question. If Hollywood's brightest stars with all their fame, money, and power couldn't escape their addictions, then how many more stories are still hidden, waiting to be told? Because in the end, addiction doesn't care about legends. It only cares about destruction.